Welcome back. Jørn is trained as a psychotraumatherapist, IoPT, and he has for many years worked with people in and outside prison. He has worked with people with addictions, and he will say more about this. So I will not say more about Jørn because he will introduce himself. And I just want to say that I'm deeply touched by Jørn's work and the person he is. So warmly welcome, Jørn.
Okay, I need to speak English. I'm from the north of Norway, so we have a language that is a little bit different than here in the south. So if it comes out a few swear words, you'll just have to deal with it. Can you take those a little bit down, the headlights, because if not, I need sunglasses. Okay, my name is Jørn Hansen. I work as an IoPT Traumatherapist. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey into IoPT. And I'm also going to tell you about a young client that came to me regarding the topics, trauma and health. But I'm going to start with myself. I'm the child of, well, both my parents are after-war children. So my grandparents, or both my granddads, were in the war. One of them was a war sailor, went with the convoys from England up to Russia. He was on 7 different ships. 3 of them was torpedoed. My other grandfather was, if some of you Norwegian has seen the movie The War of Narvik, yeah, he was fighting with the Germans on that mountain. He was 19 years old. After that battle, he got the Fortjenestemedalje, what's that? Purple Heart from the French Foreign Legion because of what he did up there. Back in those days, the only medicine they had for trauma, because they didn't know what trauma was alcohol. So both my grandparents, my granddads, were alcoholics. So my parents grew up with dads who were alcoholics. And of course, that did something to them. And that, again, did something to me and my brother. My dad, he was this guy who everyone loved. He worked as a teacher. And every autumn, when the school starts again, they had this presentation of the teachers. And when my dad came up, the 2nd and 3rd grade stood up and applauded. Because he was that guy. At work. But not at home. My mom, she got the diagnosis, today they use bipolar. I don't know the other name. But that made a very unsafe environment at home. So from I was very small, the first thing I did when I came home, I opened the front door and I shouted, "Hello, is anyone home? To check, okay, where are we today? How is my mom today? Is she up there? Is she down there? So it was very unsafe. This did a lot of damage to me, and I started drinking alcohol when I was 12 years old. Because then I found my solution to the pain. To everything, actually. So I started drinking when I was 12. I was the only one in my class when I was 13 that when Monday came, I started planning Friday and next weekend. Because then I would get some time off in my head and in my body. And that, of course, went on for many years. I started using other stuff. You won't believe it, but I'm terrified of needles. That goes deep into your body. So I've never used that because I was terrified of that. I think if I didn't have that fear, I wouldn't be alive today. Because for me, with anything I did, it was either nothing or all the way. So, long story short, when I was 32, in 2002, my ex-wife forced me into rehab. And this was a 12-step clinic, and I was there for 8 weeks, because this was a private clinic and it was very expensive. But during that time, I learned that, okay, I cannot use alcohol and I cannot use drugs, because that's not good for me. What they didn't tell me was that I was going to change my escape plan, my tool, because I have used alcohol and drugs like a tool to cope with my trauma. And when they took that tool away from me, I had to find something else. So, I have used work, I have used training, and training is a good thing to use as a trauma blocker because you can push yourself until you're tired, and to cope with your control need, you can start to control food. Okay, I have to eat this at this time, I have to this amount, and so on. And I've used many other things as well. Gaming, gambling, extreme sports, and I landed on extreme sports, the adrenaline, the kick. That made me start travel abroad. So I've been working for many years abroad as a private contractor and a bodyguard. And the worse the assignment was, the better I felt. And that did something to me, of course. My last mission abroad with a gun in my hand, I had met my wife now. And this was in Guatemala City. I was there for 6 months. And we had this understanding that, okay, we're going to talk every day. so that I know that you're safe. One time she called. I was hiding behind a car because we were in a shootout. And bullets were flying everywhere. And she called, and I thought, I have to take this call. Because if not, she's going to be afraid. So I took my phone while I was sitting behind the car. Hello! And my wife said, what's going on? There's so much noise. And I said, well, I'm in the shooting range. I have to call you back. And when it was over, I called her back. But I never told her what really happened until I've been home for, I don't know, a year maybe? Yeah. Because I didn't want her to be afraid. And like Marta said, I've been working with, after that, I've been working with people with addiction. I've also been working with youth, especially the young boys that no one can handle. I could handle. And why? Because it was a young me. I knew what they needed because I never got that. But I didn't understand it until I started to work with IoPT. My wife told me, and she's a smart woman, I always listen to her. I do, because you know, happy wife, happy life. Yeah, that's true. So, from my traveling abroad, I developed PTSD. And I didn't understand that. And why didn't I understand that? Because I went to all of these 12 steps groups, and I shared. So I didn't understand. I've put my drugs and alcohol away, and I'm sharing, I'm telling how I feel, what's going on, what I'm afraid of, everything. But I still react in the same way. Why? So my wife said, you need to speak with someone about the PTSD. And I thought, oh shit. Is this what I have? And I started reading about it, and I saw that the patterns were the same. So I thought, okay, well, I've been working abroad. I know that the Norwegian military, they have these support groups for people that's been abroad in war zones. So I called them, finally the solution. And I got this guy on the phone, and he said, well, where did you serve? And I said, well, I was in the private business. And he said, sorry, can't help you, click. So then I was back to myself again. And as Marta also said, I've been working inside prisons with inmates for many years, with groups, lectures, and they loved it because someone finally understood. Someone finally saw them. But I didn't have a clue about trauma. So I started searching because I understood that there is something more behind this. And also from my self-biography, I knew that this is something I need to take care of. In my research, I found the IoPT. And I remember my first introduction to IoPT was online. Martha had this introduction, and they did a self-meeting. And I was looking at this, and I was thinking, what the hell is this? Are these paid actors? What's going on here? Because to me it was like, oh, but something happened inside me. So I started searching, and I found Sissel in Stavanger. And I had one session with Sissel, and at that time, I was working with people who were struggling with addiction. And I said to Sissel, we need to do something together. So I brought her in on one of my courses. She had a lecture. And I decided that, okay, I need to do this. So, long story short, that's why I'm standing here. Yeah. So, trauma and health. By the way, Vivian, I liked what you said earlier about the trust between the client and the therapist. And also, like we say in Norway, the jungle telegraph. Like someone says, you need to go to see this woman or this man because they are good. Yeah. So, when I started up as a therapist, I'd worked for maybe a year. I get a phone call from a mother. And she said, I spoke to someone who's been at your place. And she said, I needed to contact you. I have a son. And he struggles a lot. He's 19 years old. And he's not doing anything now. Only gaming. He's not leaving the house. So I said, okay, we can try, but he needs to want it himself. She also told me that he had been in the public system, BUP. It's like a youth and child psychiatrist in Norway, for 6 years. I said, okay, well, let's try. And when he came to me the first time, because I have an office with doctors and a physiotherapist, so it's a big building. So I went out to get him from the waiting room, and I saw this young man, big man, like big. He was sitting in the chair like this. Like a scared animal. So I said hello, and my name, and his name. I said, okay, we're going to go into my office. And I also saw, because I let him go walk in front of me. When he walked, he was like this. I thought, okay, what's going on here? So we came in, sat down, we started talking. And I told him that, first of all, when you're here, and this is important, you are the boss. You decide. I'm not going to tell you what to do or what not to do. You decide. And I also said, if you sense inside yourself somewhere that this guy isn't the one for me, then say it. Because then we can't work together. Because you will shut down. And we will not get anywhere. And he was like, okay. And he said, but do we have to talk? I'm so tired of all the talking. And everyone telling me what to do, what not to do, how to do it, when to do it. I'm so tired of it. And I said, well, we need to have a conversation. But I'm never going to tell you what to do, because that's your choice. What I can do, I can tell you a little bit about myself. So I told this young man my story, and I said what helped me was IoPT. And he said, how? In my office, I have this blackboard on the wall. And I always start by saying, now we're going to do something. I'm going to draw, and I'm going to explain. I'm a much better explainer than I am a drawer, so I'm going to explain what I'm drawing. And he was like, well, oh, okay. So I started with basic IoPT. Not wanted, not loved, not protected. And I explained to him what happens with your, with the stress and the tipping point, and yeah. And I showed him the parts, and I explained to him what happens in the different parts. And this young man was like, wow. Why have never someone told me that before? Why? This is, and he pointed to the traumatized part, and he said, that's where I am. I'm there. I've been going to this place for 6-7 years, and they never told me that. They just told me what to do and what not to do, and made me fill out forms and to put me in a box. So he said after that first team session that I want to come back to you. We can start now. It's okay. So I said, well, okay, good. Let's do that. He came next week. He was sitting in the chair in the same way. And I thought to myself, we need to do something about this. So then I started asking him, what's going on with you? What's your story? Would you like to tell me? I told you my story. Are you comfortable with telling me your story? And he said, yeah, I am. I've been bullied at school since I was this big, because I was much bigger than the other. So the kids at school bullied me, and the teacher bullied me because I was so big. So I said to him, okay, is that why you're trying to make yourself invisible? And he said, yeah. Because if they can't see me, they can't bully me. And I said, well, that's kind of hard because you're a big guy like me. And he said, well, yeah, but I don't know what else to do. And I said, well, we can do a self-meeting. And I explained to him what a self-meeting is. And he said, no, no, no way. No, that's too scary. I don't want to do that. And I thought, okay, how are we going to do this? So we started talking about animals and how animals that are prey animals behave. And I explained to him, because I've also been a self-defense instructor for women. So I thought, okay, maybe we can use something here. Because what I'm saying when I do these self-defense courses is, if you act like a victim, you will become like a victim. Because a perpetrator, if he sees someone walking like this, he knows you're an easy prey. But if you walk like you own the world, like this, he will think twice. And we talked a little bit about that, and he said, well, yeah, I see the point. Can you teach me that? And I said, okay, let's go. And as I said, we have a big building with a lot of hallways. So we started practicing walking with a straight back and head up. And he said, well, yeah, it's okay to do it here, but when I'm going to the store, because I don't drink water, I need to make myself as little as possible so that people won't notice me. And I said, well, that's the opposite. Because if you, big guy, make yourself as small as you can, people will notice you. And they will look at you. What's lucky for me is that we have a grocery shop in the first floor. So I said, well, let's go down and practice. I go in first. You can stand in the door and watch me and see if someone's looking at me. And I walked in, and I came out to him again, and I said, well, what happened? Yeah, someone looked at you, but just like that. I said, there you go. You want to try? And I said, okay. Will you walk with me? I said, no, I'm going to walk behind you. And he walked in, and he did like this, and no one was looking at him. And we came out, and I said, well, how was that? And he said, that was great. That was really, really great. So, okay, now we're taking this. Then he told me the reason his mother had called me was because he was starting in a firm to be a truck driver, like the big trucks. And suddenly, his legs didn't work. He was going out of the truck, and his legs didn't work. So and he said, well, I've been to the hospital, they've taken tests. They didn't find anything wrong with me. And that's when the question came, what's wrong with me? So we went back to the bullying, and we spoke a lot about that. And if you listened, you heard earlier that he said, I don't drink water. So I asked him, what do you mean about the water? I can't drink water. I can't stand the noise of running water. I said, well, how about personal hygiene? Well, that's not good because I can't take a shower. I'm terrified of water. And I started thinking, okay, he's told me he's been bullied. Have something happened in swim class? Have someone tried to drown him? Have something happened there? So I asked him, and he said, no. He said, I can be on the water in a boat, no problem, but I can't be in the water. That scared the hell out of me. So I started thinking again, well, he don't want to have a self-encounter. How can we do this without having a self-encounter? How can we have a self-encounter without having a self-encounter? So I told you about my blackboard, and I said, what if you put up a sentence about water? And he said, yeah, okay, I can do that. What would that sentence be? And he said, well, it had to be, I don't want to be afraid of the water. So I said, okay, write it. And he wrote the sentence, and I said, well, if you must pick 3 words out of this sentence, and I have to be in it, what would that be? And he said, well, it had to be I and afraid and water. Okay, let's do that. And he did. And I said, okay, what if you just sit down on the sofa and just tell me, if we take the first word, is there a word here you would like to, what comes to you? And he says, water. Okay, so water. What happens inside you when you see water and you hear water? Because I also have to tell you, we live on the west coast of Norway. And there is water everywhere, especially from the air. And sideways, with a lot of wind. Yeah. And he started talking about the water, that he couldn't shower, he couldn't drink it because he was afraid of it. And he talked a lot. And then he said, in a small by sentence, he said, I can't hear them coming. And I said, who? Who can't you hear coming? The bullies. Because when you're a small kid, with your rain jacket on, and your hood on, and it's rain and it's wind, you can't hear them. Because all you hear is the water. This young man hadn't taken a shower in maybe a year. Because he was so afraid of water. He used a washing cloth, just like to his arms, but his hair, and he had quite long hair, hadn't been washed in a long, long time. So I said, okay, you can't hear them coming. Does that make sense for you? And then he started talking. He said, well, I'm terrified when it's raining and windy outside. It scares the living daylights out of me. Then I need to put myself in front of the computer. I need my headset on, and the noise needs to be loud to block out the sound of the water and the wind. And we talked a little bit around that, and I said, does this make sense for you? Why you are afraid of the water? And he said, yeah. Now I understand. Now I really do understand why I'm afraid. And I could see something happen in this young kid's eyes. It was just like to use a cartoon, when you see the light bulb like boop. Yeah. And that happened in this young guy's eyes. And I said, well, we need to see more on the topic of water and what scares you. Next time he came, when I came to picking him up from the waiting room, he was sitting like this. He walked like this, and he said, things are much better now. Because the bullies, they will not touch me now, because now I show them I'm big and I'm strong. And he said, well, but I'm still struggling a little bit about the water. I'm able to drink it. But the shower still scares me. And I said, well, that's a good thing. Don't focus on what you can't do, but keep the focus on what you have done so far. And try to be in the present when you activate the faucet for the water. And he did. And he said, well, you know what? I've started talking to myself. I said, really? I said, yeah. Because I explained to him that his trauma parts were young parts. And he said, I've started talking to myself like this young part. And I told him, water? No big deal. I'm big and strong now. Who? Okay, so I can help you. The next time he came, his hair was washed. And I said, what happened to you? And he said, well, this morning I had a shower for 17 minutes. And I said, how was that? And he said, it was like getting a warm hug. He did not function. And why? We live on the West Coast. There's a lot of rain, there's a lot of wind. In summertime, he had no problems because he wasn't triggered. But on the West Coast, spring, fall, and winter, it's rain and it's wind. Trauma and health. Today, he's driving a truck. And that's good. So, that was all I had.